Hello and welcome to Community Forum. I'm your host, Joseph Feaster. Today I have a very interesting guest, a person who has served in our U.S. Congress since 2001, a person who has represented not only Stoughton but several cities and towns here on the South Shore, a person who is fiercely independent, a person who is in the leadership within the House, and a person who has represented our communities in a very extraordinary way. Beside that, he is a friend. My guest this morning is U.S. Congressman Stephen Lynch. Hello, Congressman, and welcome to the show.
Good to be with you, Joe.
Congressman, I could go through your resume, and to some extent, I guess that I will, because I always like the viewing audience to have a context of the person that we have.
Appreciate that.
From the years that I've known you, I know certainly you were an iron worker in terms of profession before you got into politics. You have gotten your education, got a master's degree from John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. You served in the House of Representatives in the state. You served there for only about 14 months and then went on, I believe in 1996, went on to the state Senate. And then in 2001, an interesting thing that I found out is that what you represented was what was then called the 9th Congressional District, and then Massachusetts lost the district, and now you represent us here within the 8th Congressional District, which is somewhat of a different configuration. But in this 113 Congress, you are a member of the Financial Services Committee, the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. You are the ranking member on the Subcommittee on Federal Workforce, U.S. Postal Service and the Census, and you are a member of the Subcommittee on National Security. And you are the co-founder of the Congressional Labor and Working Families Caucus, where, as you have all throughout your political career, have been concerned about the good of working rights and protecting workers, as always, even from the days when you were in the union as an iron worker. So, Congressman, given that deep background, but why don't you elaborate a little bit upon your own personal experiences? What took you or made you make the decision to enter politics? And if you could just walk us through your thoughts and where you've now arrived at now almost 13 years as a congressman.
Yeah. Well, Joe, first of all, thank you for your kind remarks. I'm not from a political family. I'm the first person in my family to ever run for political office. Really, I arrived at a decision to run for then state representative when I was representing families in public housing. I was a young attorney representing families who had lead paint on the windows or asbestos on the pipes, or had single parent with 5 or 6 kids in a 1-2 bedroom apartment, underhoused, as they said. So I got active in my community representing those families, and after a while, people said to me, we never see our elected official down here. The housing projects in the Boston area, especially in South Boston, were pretty violent back in that day. A lot of drug problems, a lot of domestic violence issues, in some cases gunplay and gang activity, things like that. So, I think I distinguished myself as someone who would go down and try to work on those problems on behalf of families. And so, after a while, and I was doing that as a volunteer attorney. I wasn't getting paid for it. So, after a while, people came to me and said, if you ran for office, you could do all the things you're doing right now, but you'd be getting a paycheck. And so that sort of appealed to my wife. And so I ran for state representative, lucky enough to be elected. And then when Senator Bulger left to become president of UMass, I ran for his seat and was successful again. And then when my dear friend, Congressman Joe Moakley, passed away, our families were very close. My Uncle Sleepy and my Uncle Yappa were 2 of his first campaign managers back in the late 50s. And we just had a real connection with Joe. He was a dear friend of mine. And their family supported me the Moakley family, when I decided to run for Joe's seat after he had passed. So that's how, quite unexpectedly, I arrived in Congress. But I think that some of my own life experience, being an iron worker, strapping on a pair of work boots every day, going out there working on a job, construction sites, in a dangerous profession, one that isn't always continuous. You get laid off after the building's complete. I've spent plenty of time in an unemployment line, so I know what that feels like, and I think I can relate to people today that are having a tough time finding a job. I know the importance of training. I went through the Iron Workers Apprenticeship School, so I guess I have a more hands-on working class understanding of what it is to grow up in today's society. And I realized that I had lived in public housing, so and our family would have been homeless but for the fact that we had good public housing to live in. I have 5 sisters. We come from a big family, so there were times there we were grateful for government assistance in either providing unemployment for myself or for my dad, and also my mom worked for the post office. So we had a different view of the benefits that government can provide, not giving a handout, but certainly helping people when they're in a tough spot and giving people a way to raise their standard of living and have some basic protections, which are very important now when you look at Social Security, unemployment benefits, food stamps, things like that a lot of families unfortunately are relying on.
Well, Congressman, I mean, I've known you and been a friend of yours since the time when you first got into House of Representatives here in the Commonwealth, and I gather that recitation that you just made of your own rearing and your own growing up in South Boston is illustrative of what your thinking is and what has shaped how you approach even what you're doing as a congressman. And as you said, your predecessor, who I knew well and worked on many issues for, the late Joe Moakley, who was just an extraordinary congressman for the district. And it seems like his successor is following in the same footsteps.
You're very kind.
You have shaped your involvements in Congress based upon what you've just stated. Can you? I know you sponsored some legislation that deals with working people. You sponsored some issues around the financial institutions and their ability to work with folks in the community. And then I want to talk about, because you not only have limited yourself there, you've also gone abroad to look at some foreign relation issues. But let's start local. Sure. In the sense of some of the legislation that you've talked about, and specifically there are 2 bills. House Bill 2860 is called the OPM IG Act. And the other one is H.R. 4022, the Security Clearance Reform Act of 2014. Now, can you explain to our audience what those bills are about?
Let me try to simplify it.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. We had a terrible incident down at the Washington, D.C. Navy Yard where a government contractor, Aaron Alexis, actually, who had some psychological problems, went in and snuck a sawed-off shotgun into the facility and killed 12 people, wounded 4 others. It turns out that he had a security clearance that allowed him to get into that facility, but that it had been issued many years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, and there had been incidents of very erratic behavior. He had been hearing voices. He had some psychiatric issues. He had actually pulled his firearm on a couple of occasions. He had been arrested in Oregon and arrested down in Georgia. He had fired shots in instances that were totally inappropriate. And because of those incidents, his security clearance should have been withdrawn.
Right.
But the way the system is right now in awarding those security clearances, which allow people to read top secret information, have access to otherwise secure facilities, the way it works now is if you get a top secret clearance, you are not reviewed for 10 years. Wow. So in this case, Aaron Alexis received his clearance in 2005, was not scheduled to be reviewed until 2015, Meanwhile, we had all these incidents going on. So my bill would discontinue the 10-year look back and would instead introduce a continuous reevaluation. If the Oregon police reported illegal firearm use, that would go right to the Center of OPM and the Inspector General to be able to ascertain whether that security clearance should be maintained or whether it should be withdrawn. So we wanted a continual basis so that any incidents like that would automatically pop up a red flag and cause that security clearance to be reviewed. The other bill, the Inspector General, the OPM IG Act, actually provides funding. There's a $2 billion revolving fund that the Inspector General oversees. The Inspector General is basically our oversight entity within the Obama administration. They basically check the departments to make sure that the laws are being administered in a way that is consistent with congressional intent. So oftentimes they don't have enough resources to do the inspections that we're asking them to do. Yes. So the Inspector General IG funding piece would allow them a small stipend or access to a small part of that revolving fund so they can do the inspections that we are asking them to do. So they sort of marry each other, and the OPM IG Act, the President, I was very happy. I was the lead Democratic sponsor on the bill. The President signed it about 10 days ago, so I was pretty happy to see
Congratulations.
that accomplished. Thank you. And that we don't agree much. We don't agree on much in Washington lately. So to get a win, to actually get to the point where the President signs a bill that's co-sponsored by a Republican and a Democrat, it's a good thing.
The two things are that, just for clarification. One is on the OPM IG Act. Does the IG Inspector General have the type of independence that you would determine is adequate in order to do that? Because as you and I both know, plenty of laws are passed, but they don't really come into practice or into fruition in a way as it was intended. So do you feel that that process will be helpful in terms of mitigating some of the concerns that you have as a congressman?
Absolutely. We really do have, and I'm on an oversight committee, so I deal with our inspectors general for all these different departments on a regular basis. So yes, I think they are dedicated professionals. The only limitations that they really have are resources. In other words, the Inspector Generals are responsible for conducting investigations, and you can only do so many of those because of having inadequate personnel or full-time equivalents. You can only put so many people in the field if your funds are limited. And lately, because of sequestration, a limitation on our budget, those Inspector Generals, I think, have been really handcuffed from doing some of the necessary work that they can do. That IG Act, the OPM IG Act, actually frees up some money. It doesn't increase taxes, but that $2 billion fund that they're overseeing, they used to only get about $3 million out of that, which is not nearly enough to do the job that we asked them to do. So hopefully this will free up those individuals to be able to put more investigators in the field and to protect the taxpayer and American citizens.
Just as and this is almost a good segue to the next topic I'd like for us to discuss. You talked about the Inspector General providing that type of oversight, being able to go in and to confirm that the departments are doing what they legislatively were required to do or expected to do. Another shift from that is what was going on in the National Security Administration, and also what was in the news last year around the IRS, and in the sense of gathering private information and using information in a particular way. And I'm not going to characterize it or give my own impression of it, just a question of what's been debated and discussed, and I know you've spoken on that quite a bit, is both the information that the National Security Administration was collecting on a global basis about all citizens, both here and abroad, and then the IRS issue. Would you care to comment on that?
Sure. As you know, and this became public through Edward Snowden, who illegally downloaded a lot of information and then shared it with the Guardian newspaper and a number of other media outlets. One of the things that Edward Snowden disclosed was a metadata gathering program that was being operated by the National Security Administration that had not been disclosed to Congress. So the way they were operating this system, the NSA, is they would go through internet providers and telecommunications companies. They would capture in this large, very sophisticated computer network, they would capture all of the phone calls, not the language or text between people, but the fact that a call was made to a certain individual at a certain place and time, and so the contact between those individuals was gathered. Now, billions and billions of maybe hundreds of billions of phone calls were captured. It was just a sweep, and there was no assertion of probable cause or anything like that might give suspicion to the NSA to take that action. They were just doing this in a broad sweep, taking all of these phone calls and then holding them in storage in this computer system. And then what they were doing is later on, if they identified a phone call from a suspect in a foreign country or here in the U.S., they would then go back and access the data, the calls that had been made, without going to a FISA court, without any showing of probable cause. And they would reach back into that repository of data and then begin to analyze. And they would start with the beginning phone call, which was, from person A to person B. Then they would do one more step removed. Anyone who called person A or person B, anybody in contact, and they would do one more jump. Anybody who called A or B and received calls from somewhere else. So you're talking about millions of people being captured in a certain sort of dragnet, and the details of their conversations, again, not the text, but the fact that calls were being made back and forth were captured and were utilized. So none of this really, in a meaningful way, was subject to any sort of judicial scrutiny. The FISA court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, actually was pretty much giving a rubber stamp. So there was no real scrutiny over what the NSA was doing. And to the surprise of many members of Congress, this was going forward on a very large basis. It was started back under the Bush administration. It was continued under the Obama administration. So one of the bills that I'm sponsoring right now would require them to discontinue that current program and really introduce the idea of probable cause. There has to be some type of detective work that says that, because of activities of a given person or probable cause proved before a court, again, the FISA court, there is probable cause to investigate the communications of an individual. The other thing is, right now, the FISA court, it's ex parte. The government is there, but there's no one there on behalf of the average citizen to say, hey, wait a minute, this is wrong. There is not probable cause. There's no adversarial representation in terms of going before the FISA court. So my bill would actually...
Sounds like a prosecutor.
And a defense attorney. There's a prosecutor in the courtroom, but there is no defense attorney.
When you grand jury, for instance, it'd be similar to grand jury where you only hear one side of the story.
Right. So my bill would introduce a position called the Privacy Advocacy General. And that person, that department, would be there to push back on the NSA to say, no, there is not probable cause to access the data of an individual citizen. And I think that's the type of separation of powers, number one. You'd have the judiciary against the executive. And you'd also have someone who is actively representing the interests of citizens in their personal privacy.
Congressman, let me just taking that, excuse me for cutting you off,
Sorry.
but I wanted just to interject something else for you to speak on. Let's take the other tack. Let's say, okay, fine. You have to go through this process, and the civil liberties aspects which you're referring to here are most appropriate. That's what our Constitution is founded on. Right. But they say, well, if we do all of that, there are incidents can happen like 9/11 and Boston Marathon bombing, because we have to go through these hurdles of trying to process this and make sure everyone's civil liberties are done. How do you counteract that type of thinking? Because I can assure you, some of our viewing audience is saying, hey, why are we doing this? Yeah. We want this attended to, we want it taken care of, and we want to be direct responsive no matter whose interests may be violated, if you will.
Well, interesting, that's a great question. It's not the first time it's been raised, but under our current framework and under my bill, the NSA would be able to act on a threat. However, after the fact, they would have to go back before the FISA court to justify whatever action they had taken. So, yes, they can act immediately in the case of a tangible and real threat. That's not what they've been doing lately. They've been actually gathering all this information and then waiting for something to happen that triggers a need to go back and look at the data. And under our bill and under the existing law, to be perfectly honest, there's an ability for the NSA, the CIA, the FBI to act first if there's a danger, if there's a clear and present danger, and then after the fact, after they've taken their action, they still have to go back before the FISA court and then prove that their intervention or their data gathering was justified. So it's sort of it answers both concerns. It allows them to act, but also holds them responsible for the intrusion on a citizen's privacy, which I think is very, very important.
Now, I know that the Obama administration and President Obama did put in some, if you will, some procedures which would mitigate some of what was alleged by Snowden was taking place as far as his information gathering. Do you find those to be sufficient, or you feel that it's necessary to codify it by having this legislation?
Well, I think anything that's done by executive action, which is what the president has done, can be reversed by the next administration. It's basically an executive order by the president. It's not legislation, so it goes away. Very often, when we saw Bill Clinton come in after George H.W. Bush, he changed all the executive orders, many of them. And then we saw George W. Bush come in after Clinton, and he changed many of the executive orders. When President Obama came in, he changed many of the executive orders of George W. Bush. So it goes from administration to administration. There's no continuity. And this is so important, I think, that legislatively we have to have a system that is as you say, codified in law, and that will survive from one administration to the next. I also, in terms of what President Obama has done, he has not put an advocacy general in the courtroom, in the FISA court, to defend the privacy rights of individuals in that proceeding. And I think that is one of the basic tenets of our Constitution, where we have separation of powers and also rely on that advocacy, a defense counsel protecting those who are presumed innocent.
I'm going to really make my job easy here today with you, Congressman, and that is, I want to now shift a bit to some of the other domestic issues which are being addressed in Congress. And I don't think I need to belabor what we as citizens feel has been just a logjam as far as in Congress, the ability to allowing the president to get anything done, particularly in the House, your body in the House of Representatives. The Senate has
Thanks,
been
Joe.
Well, I know you've been trying very, very hard,
No,
Congressman, in order to get it done,
kidding.
but right now you're outnumbered, and your party is not in power. in the House. But there are certain issues that have been debated or discussed throughout the entire Obama administration, and I'm just going to lump them all together, and you can pick the one and comment on them. So the three that I would take would be: one, the Affordable Care Act. You know, I refuse to call it the Obamacare. I just feel it's the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah.
The other one is the whole question around immigration, which has been bantered around even during the prior administration, the George W.'s administration. And the other one would be the minimum wage, because you always look out for working class folks. And so some of those issues are integrated because they definitely have an impact upon the constituents you represent. Could you talk about that?
Sure. Well, I think that most people realize that the federal minimum wage needs to be raised. I think that we have a lot of support on the Republican side as well. And as far as the inability of Congress to get together, I think there's probably enough blame to go around. I think that in some cases the Democrats and in some cases the Republicans prevent agreements from being reached. I do think that the president is often frustrated because of I think there are, in some cases, like in immigration, for instance, I think there was a bill in the Senate that passed that I think satisfied 90% of the people out there, both left and right, Republican and Democrat. But in that case, on the immigration bill, even though there seems to be general agreement that a comprehensive immigration bill should pass, the Republicans have now just looked at the calendar and said, well, we don't want to bring this up now. We're going to wait till after the election. It's for strategic reasons. Mm-hmm. But I do expect that after the elections, and I think the House will remain in Republican hands, I think there is, a consensus that a bill has to be brought forward and we have to deal with that, because right now it's just not working out. The system we have is not working. It's broken, and there's got to be some way to improve for economic reasons, for human rights reasons, to revamp our immigration laws. And I think there are other votes to get that passed, but it's more of an issue of timing for Speaker Boehner. I think that in terms of the Affordable Care Act, it's a much different place. I think that because the bill doesn't completely phase in until 2018, I think a lot of people are sort of sitting back and saying, well, let's see how this works out. We haven't even implemented a lot of the provisions in the Affordable Care Act, so there's not a huge push to go in and actually fix some of the things that apparently are broken.
Let me just interject, because I want your constituents to know you voted against the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, and I think one needs to put that in context to know the why.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you state why you voted against it?
Oh, sure. I think that we made a number of mistakes on the Affordable Care Act. And by the way, I thought getting everybody signed up was the easy part, and we're proving that wrong. But, first of all, we put a heavy taxation on health care. Until the Affordable Care Act, we never taxed health care. We treated it like a universal good. We don't tax food. We tax liquor and cigarettes, things like that, but those are sin taxes. We don't tax general food because people would die without it. We didn't tax health care for the same reasons. We wanted more health care, so we didn't tax it, because whenever you tax something, you get less of it. The Affordable Care Act changed that. We put pretty heavy taxes on companies that provide generous or so-called Cadillac health plans. So that puts a disincentive on people. The other thing is we didn't give people a strong public option. In other words, the idea that we had in the House version of the Affordable Care Act was that we were going to rely on competition, not taxation, to be the funding mechanism behind a new healthcare system. What we said was we were going to allow each state of Massachusetts, to get into the healthcare game so that they could put a product out there something bare bones, just a good solid health care. We're not talking liposuction or, anything exotic, but just a good solid basic health care plan, and do it cheaply. The state could be in the market. Now, what that does, that public option, it requires all of the other health care plans to say, hey, wait a minute, we got competition here. We're going to have to compete with that program, otherwise we're going to lose business. It induces all these other health care plans to get lean and mean and lower their prices to compete with that public option. We didn't allow that. We basically disallowed in the Affordable Care Act the state public option. The other thing what was nice for Massachusetts, if we could have got that public option, is that we could have easily linked up with Connecticut and Rhode Island and increased the mass of people that we were serving by those public options. Mm-hmm. We could have got that critical mass to, the more people in, you can lower the prices. So that was another thing that I think we failed on. I think that we have made a mistake by punishing employers, and there's a heavy tax that's going to come in 2018, and I think this is where the rubber's going to meet the road, is when we start taxing good companies like Raytheon or Gillette, or GE, these big employers. We start punishing them with a tax because they're giving too much health care, too high quality health care to their employees. We actually do that in 2018, and I think that is the wrong thing to do. I think we should be encouraging companies to do that instead of penalizing them for doing that. The other problem that we have, and it goes back to the IRS issue, all of this information on your health care, on your medical conditions, is being gathered by the IRS. And we've all seen the breaches of security that have happened already. So this system that we're implementing, it depersonalizes health care. So, I used to be an iron worker. I worked for a company, and I knew who the owners were. I knew who the vice presidents were. We negotiated our health care plan with them. And to be honest with you, they wanted me to be happy and to have good health care. Right. They knew me. They knew me. They knew my family. And I think that, it was the better part, the better part of their character, that they wanted their employees to have good health care. Well, now, if you're going to an exchange, that employer is out of the picture. Mm-hmm. You're going to a faceless bureaucrat that you will never meet, and I'm afraid is not really incentivized to make sure that you and your family have the best health care. It's going to be a much different system, and I'm very nervous about that. I think that we have a lot of fixing to do in terms of the Affordable Care Act. I would like to get to that, but right now, the Republicans in Congress, mostly the Tea Party, have been trying to just repeal everything, even the good things that have come up through the Affordable Care Act. They just want to get rid of everything, and I don't think that's the answer either. We should be sitting down in Congress and trying to figure out the best way to deliver high-quality health care to the people who need it, the people that we work for. That should be our goal, and instead it's become really a political football.
Well, and the reason why I wanted to basically put on the record the fact that you had opposed the legislation is that, notwithstanding that, you're still in the fixing business. I mean, you're looking at trying to say, okay, I oppose it for the reasons which you just articulated, but the other thing is I'm willing to be one of the fixers because I think that as a basis, it is the correct way, and we've tried for a long time to get what they call universal health care in this country.
Right. Well, interestingly, when I sat with President Obama in the White House, our differences were this. I pointed out a lot of the problems that I've previously stated here and a bunch of others that I saw as major problems to the legislation. And not surprisingly, the president turned around and added a few more things to my list. He said, yeah, and don't forget, we've got this problem, this problem, this problem. My approach was, Mr. President, we need to fix this. We need to fix it now. We got this opportunity. We control the House and the Senate. Now's the time to get this thing done. The President's opinion, with all due respect, was let's pass it now as is and we'll fix it later. We'll have that opportunity later on. Unfortunately, people were so mad about the terms of the Affordable Care Act when it passed that in that very next election, after the Affordable Care Act passed, there were 91 new members of Congress elected. 86 of them were Republicans, and 5 were Democrats. And since then, we have lost every opportunity to modify or fix, in a very real way, the flaws in the Affordable Care Act. And now we've got these taxes that are coming in. We've got major problems here in Massachusetts with our the connector and the state-run exchange. So it's going to be very difficult in the near term to get, I think, meaningful change, positive change. And I've met with our hospitals. They're very concerned. I've met with our insurers. I've met with our physician groups, nurses. They're all very, very concerned about the amount of money that's being pulled out of Medicare, for example. $590 billion pulled out of Medicare. They're afraid that the reimbursement rates will cause providers and suppliers to run away from serving Medicare patients. So we've got some major issues, but we should be in the fix-it stage and not in this repeal stage. We should figure out, we should be trying to focus on ways to make this better for the people that we represent. We owe them that.
Well, Congressman, I'm going to do 2 things because I want us now to shift a bit and talk about some of the things you're doing in foreign affairs. But also, I would be remiss because I've learned from your predecessors, both Tip O'Neill and Joe Moakley, and from you all, politics is local, so we'll have to end on what affects us here in Stoughton.
Sure.
Because I live here and I know the Stoughton residents want our issues to be addressed with you as well. But for the moment, I know you've made a number of trips to Iran and to Afghanistan. In fact, I know in our conversations yesterday that you're going to be going again to Afghanistan, maybe for your 9th or 10th visit over to next month in March. But also, you've spoken out quite a bit on the U.S. policy in Syria, where things are definitely fermenting in a way which is causing even more strife or turmoil in the Middle East. Can you talk about that, your views on both of those, all of those 3 countries?
Sure.
And I think you're going to Israel as well.
That's right.
So you're going to be in those 4 countries.
Right.
And can you talk a little bit about that?
I do want to clarify. I think you might have said I've been to Iran a bunch of times. We don't have diplomatic relations with Iran, so I am not allowed in there. I would have to go as a private citizen, and I don't think I would survive in Iran right now. But I have been to Iraq. Later on, in a matter of weeks, I'll be heading over to Iraq. That'll be my 15th trip to Iraq. As you said, I think this next one will be my 10th trip to Afghanistan, and also probably my 10th trip to Israel as well. But I think that the president's got it right. Right now in Afghanistan, the withdrawal process is on schedule. And what we're trying to do right now is to negotiate an agreement with the Karzai government to determine how many troops, not combat troops, but the necessary troops to do force protection, to protect our embassies and our consulates after the end of 2014. And right now, we are having a very difficult time in negotiating that agreement because the Afghan government is insisting that any U.S. personnel remaining in Afghanistan beyond 2014 would be subject to Afghan law. And I've spent enough time in the country and seen enough to be very, very cautious about doing that. The rule of law is very weak in Afghanistan, and I could not in good conscience support an agreement that allowed our men and women in uniform or State Department personnel to be subject to a Shura Council or to tribal law that is completely biased against the West and that do not have the necessary protections of a solid constitution. We just can't allow that. So Joe Dunford, General Joe Dunford, originally from South Boston and Quincy, is the commanding general over there in Afghanistan. And he has said that we need about 10,000 troops to be left behind just to secure our bases. These are not combat troops. These are protective battalions. And that if we can't get an agreement on 10,000, then we should just completely withdraw, go to zero. You know, I think that's probably a reasonable position to take. If we cannot get an agreement that protects our sons and daughters, whether they're State Department personnel or DEA or U.S. military, we shouldn't deploy them in that country any longer. We have given the opportunity for Afghanistan to grasp democracy, but we cannot force them to do so. So, you know, I support the President's timetable for withdrawal. I think we're getting there. I think we've got another 8,000 that are coming out by the end of this month, so I think that push is coming to shove. If we can't get that agreement, I think the President is right. We should probably just draw down to zero and leave it at that. We have spent too much blood and treasure. We have lost too many of our sons and daughters to make the mistake of leaving our personnel in that country subject to the vagaries of Afghan law. And I think it's important to note that the Karzai government is trying to negotiate with the Taliban to sort of bring them into the government in some way. I think that would be a very, very bad decision on their part. It may be necessary in some respects to reduce the kinetic activity of the Taliban, but it would be the worst thing for Afghan women and girls to have the rights that the current Afghan constitution allows to them. I think it would be a disaster. And when you talk to the Afghan women leaders across that country, they do not want the Taliban to be dictating the limits of their human rights.
Congressman, I would like to stay with the foreign affairs, but I'm watching my time, and I'm going to need to go to break in a moment in order to give deference and support to our sponsors. But I think when we come out of the break, I need to come local again and talk about what some of the issues that we're facing here in Stoughton that you might be able to be helpful for. So we're going to go to break and deal with our sponsors, and we'll be right back. You can reach Congressman Stephen Lynch at 88 Black Falcon Avenue, Suite 340, Boston, Massachusetts, 02210. By phone, 617-428-2000. He would love to hear from his constituents, or by fax at 617-428-2011. The crew would like to thank Maxie's Delicatessen. They are the ones who provide the food that we have here on the station each and every time Community Forum is on. They're located at 117 Sharon Street in Stoughton and can be reached. We'd love to hear from you at 781-341-1662. American Cancer Society is looking for volunteers to drive cancer patients to and from treatments. If you have the time, have the interest, have the compassion, they can certainly use your help. Their phone number is 1-800-ACS-6662, or you can reach them on their website at www.cancer.org. Ilse Mark's Food Pantry and St. Anthony's Free Market are located at First United Methodist Church. They can use your assistance as well, and certainly your supply of food products. For more information, you can call Christine Gallagher at 781-341-0611 or 781-341-0549. Meals on Wheels They as well can use your assistance in providing and driving food products to some of our persons who are homebound. And if you're interested in assisting them, you can ask for Jessica, and you can give her a call at 781-344-8882, extension 2. Stoughton Penny Savers. These folks will get the word out on your businesses and give you an opportunity to expand your customer base. As they say, our business is advertising your business. They're located at 27 Rose Glen Street in Stoughton, and you could reach them to place your ads at 781-344-4833. International Forum Show, interviewing guests with local roots throughout the world via Skype. The program airs on Sundays at 8:30 p.m., Mondays at 11 p.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., Thursdays at 9:30 p.m., Saturdays at 12 noon, and you can view the program at Comcast Channel 9 or Verizon Channel 28. My favorite program, Community Forum, showtimes for Stoughton are Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at 6 p.m., Monday at 8 p.m., Tuesday at 5 p.m., and you can view the program at Comcast Channel 9 or Verizon Channel 28. And certainly, if you have any thoughts, suggestions, comments, you can reach us at communityforum1@yahoo.com. Community Forum also has show times for the Eastern residents at Mondays at 9 p.m., Tuesdays at 8 a.m., Wednesdays at 3 p.m., Saturdays at 10 a.m., again on Comcast Channel 9, Verizon Channel 22. Comments and suggestions are welcome. You can reach us at communityforum1@yahoo.com. Well, Congressman, we're back. Viewing audience, we're back. And I want to get local. Okay. And I want to talk about some of the things that, as I know, Nick and others have been here in Stoughton, being aware of some of the issues and have brought them to your attention. And one of the things that we're concentrating on with our master plan is looking at the revitalization of our downtown, which is one of our primary concerns, but we have some desires to do some things on 138 and Route 27, and basically expand our economic base and tax base. Two issues that we have is one, the Stoughton Depot, which the town is in the process, or the Stoughton Redevelopment Authority is in the process of acquiring. But right adjacent to that, and I know you took the tour during Town Manager Crimmon's tenure, about the post office, and you sit on, you're a member of that committee in Congress. One of the things we wanted to engage in was a conversation with the post office of possible relocating, downsizing the space they have, maybe some regional considerations with other towns adjacent to Stoughton. Any thoughts that you have as to how we might proceed, any assistance that your office might be able to provide with regards to the post office?
And I appreciate the effort and the central location of the post office. I think it's important, if we're going to get this right, we have to include the post office in whatever end result we arrive at. I'm working with the Postal Service right now in terms of relocating the South Station mail facility. They're working out a relocation with Massport and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's a big operation. I think that the post office is an institution that is in transition right now, so I think they're reevaluating. It's probably a good time to look at their operations in Stoughton to see whether they could be relocated and what type of presence they would need. I know that they're doing a consolidation effort. We have 168,000 post offices in the United States, and because of the drop-off in mail, the volume in mail, we probably don't need a third of those. And so we're trying to figure out those that will remain or be updated, and those that will be consolidated. Most of the effort at consolidation has really focused on urban areas or suburban areas that might have an ancillary location where they could shift to, so you wouldn't have any layoffs. You would just have people reporting to a different location. So
Now, that was done in Norwood. I'm not sure if is Norwood one of your
Norwood's
cities?
one of my towns, yeah.
I think they did something with the post office in Norwood.
Right.
I think it's one location.
Right. And so that reevaluation is occurring on a weekly basis and monthly basis. So I would certainly be very happy, since I am the top Democrat on the postal subcommittee, and we deal with this on a regular basis. I know that there are the post office is in a much different frame of mind in terms of trying to accommodate the users and to recognize the importance of their facilities in some of our areas. So I'm totally committed to work with the master plan group or with town government to make sure we get them into the discussion and see what can happen. Because I think that the handwriting is on the wall in terms of the volume of mail out there. We've seen it reduced by billions and billions of pieces of mail, and that I don't think the mail is coming back. I think it's important to say that year after year, when they do an assessment of government workers, and they rate them according to customer satisfaction, the postal workers are at the top in terms of customer satisfaction. People love their letter carriers. They love the clerks. They love their mail handlers. They feel that those are the most hardworking and loyal and dedicated employees year after year. So there's got to be a way to do it that we make this transition without putting undue burden on those workers, and try to make sure that there is an adjacent facility. If they're going to move from one facility, there's got to be a way to make sure that delivery standards are met, people are still getting their mail, and that those workers still have the opportunity to continue in their careers.
Well, thank you, Congressman, for the offer to sit with town government and discuss that. And offline, I'll chat with you, because you're too busy for me to approach you directly, but I'm sure one of your staffers you might assign that I can speak to, and we can talk about that offline. The other issue, because we only have a few moments here, that I would like to talk about was, as you know, one of the Governor Patrick's major initiatives in transportation is the South Coast Rail. And the South Coast Rail is at least talked about at the present time and designed at least by the Army Corps of Engineers to traverse through many of the towns in which you represent. Your thoughts on that? We have some views here in Stoughton, and I'm not going to try to speak for Stoughton government, but nonetheless, your thoughts on how it may affect your communities. How will your office play a part in that conversation, and should we in local government be approaching you with some of our thoughts and ideas?
Well, I think there's general consensus that, well, at least I won't say uniformly, but I think there's a real benefit that could be had by going forward with the governor's idea on South Coast Rail. But the trick here is really the funding mechanism, and how do we make sure that it goes forward in it's a huge task. I think the benefits are there at the end, but with all of the other challenges that the MBTA has and commuter rail has, it would be a mistake, I think, to go forward without having a solid revenue stream to fund that extension. So while I think it's a great idea, but I think you've got to pick those areas where you can begin the engineering parts of this, the environmental parts of it, measure the impacts, and move forward on that basis. But I keep looking at the state budget, and basically how you do your budget is you look at your revenue and figure out what you can safely rely on. And I think that with all the other challenges that we're going to have with healthcare, with schools, with public safety, I think we've got to try to prioritize those things that you can do, and maybe we can go forward with the beginning phases of you know, the South Coast Rail project, but have a timeline that allows us to manage this as we go forward, as opposed to having a major outlay in the early years. So, you know, my role on the federal level obviously will be trying to bring enough federal resources to the project. However, those will be largely on infrastructure and not necessarily on the operational side. The state's going to have to handle that themselves.
Well, Congressman, I know our time is winding down. I want to say, having known you all these years, since you have been in both state government as a representative, state senate, and now as a congressman for the past 13 years, you've just had a stellar impact in all of those branches of government, and continue to do so now in your role as our congressman here in Stoughton. And Stoughton has recognized that, because I think in most of the election you've won Stoughton by large margins, no matter who is the opposition. You know, Stoughton has truly supported you. So we as Stoughtonites, let's continue to give our support to the congressman in whatever endeavor that he might pursue.
Well, I'm grateful. Thank you for your kind words, Joe. And you know, one of the difficult parts of serving in Congress is you have to go to Congress. Yeah. So I don't get to spend nearly as much time as I would like in Massachusetts. We're down there 4 days a week, and so I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and sit with you and talk about some of the local issues. And you know, I'd love to come back, and you know, we've got some other issues that are percolating in Washington that I think have a special interest on behalf of the people of Stoughton.
Well, you have an open invitation. You certainly, audience, you can definitely reach the congressman and at his offices at Black Falcon Terminal to talk about the concerns that you have. He has a very competent staff, most of whom I know, in his office, and they will definitely help to address your issues. So, Congressman, thank you. I bid you Godspeed as you travel abroad to Afghanistan, to Israel, and I know we didn't get a chance to talk about your Libyan trip, but we can do that on the next show.
Yeah, we can.
So again, thank you. Godspeed on your travel. Best to the family. And once again, thank you for appearing on Community Forum.
Thank you, Joe. Your kindness. Thank you.
Former Ambassador,